Territory Manager with Electronic Data Solutions, and today we're going to talk about really what I think is one of the premier solutions when it comes to landfill gas emissions in the entire country. We all know that compliance issues are a huge deal. We deal with global warming, gas, greenhouse emissions, things like that, especially here in the state of California where I'm located. So this is a solution that really hits home with a lot of our customers because it takes a lot of those regulations and it streamlines them, puts them into a nice CSV file, Excel file, takes away a lot of the paper processes associated with quarterly monitoring. In terms of our agenda today, I'll give you a quick introduction on our company, talk very briefly about the way a lot of agencies and a lot of landfills and a lot of consultants are still doing it. And then we'll talk specifically about Trimble's SiteFID solution. I'll give you a demonstration of the software. And then for you folks that are live with me today, we'll answer some questions. For you folks that are listening to this as part of a recorded session, I'll stop the recording when it's time for questions. In terms of electronic data solutions, our company has been around now for 27 years. Our home office is located in Jerome, Idaho. That's southern Idaho, just across the Snake River from Twin Falls, Idaho. Most folks like myself, the salespeople, we work out of home offices. I'm located in Sacramento, California. We have offices in Portland, Olympia, Missoula. We have offices in Idaho and Utah as well. So we cover mostly the West Coast. So we're not looking for world domination at this point. We're just looking for West Coast domination. But we do a lot of different things, and I'm going to take just a moment to tell you about some of our other offerings as well. When it comes to our vertical markets and some of the different industries we serve a lot of different industries. When I'm giving a presentation like this, I'm not real big on reading bullet points. I'm assuming most people at this point have learned how to read. So basically, unless I see something I really want to highlight, I'm basically just going to keep the slide up and let you take a peek at it. But this is a good indication of some of the different vertical markets that we serve. And we have solutions for all of these markets. So if you're listening in with a consulting engineering company or you're with a utility or some other entity and you see something on this list that interests you, please give us a call and let's talk about some of your specific applications and what we can do to help you out. We really have two main markets that we serve. One of the markets that we serve we call water resources. And within water resources, we work with some of these fine manufacturers when it comes to things like pressure transducers, water quality instrumentation, acoustic Doppler current profilers. We've got some great software suites where if you're collecting tons of data out in the field and you don't quite know what to do with it, we've got solutions for that as well. We do full system integrations, whether you're looking for telemetry out in the field or you're looking to put an acoustic Doppler in a specific application. In a canal or channel, whatever your need is, if it comes to equipment that's being used for environmental reasons, really good chance that we can help you out. In terms of the other side of our business, what we call our GPS GIS markets, we work with Trimble, the largest manufacturer of GPS devices in the entire universe. We're one of their largest resellers of what they call mapping grade equipment. That's accuracy anywhere from, say, sub-meter to now we can actually get you down to a centimeter with mapping grade equipment, whereas before that was kind of the realm of survey companies. You can actually now, for about half the price of survey equipment, get the mapping grade equipment and get accuracy down to 1 centimeter. So again, if you see something on this particular slide that's of interest to you, we're here to help you out. So one of the things that we like to do for a couple of reasons, one, to make sure that you're listening, and two, just to make sure that we understand what your needs are, we're going to throw a couple of poll questions at you during the course of today's webinar. Our first one is a pretty basic question, and we just want to have you answer this as quickly as you can, and then we'll show you the results as well. Tell us what you're using right now when it comes to landfill gas emissions. And of course, for the people that are listening to this pre-recorded webinar, you can actually just kind of fast forward past this part if you would like. So once we get everybody to vote here, we'll show you the results real quick, and then we'll move on. Fantastic. It looks like everybody has voted, so let's go ahead and we'll share the results. About a third of you are using a competitive solution at this point. Some folks not doing any monitoring. It's nice to see that some folks are still actually using the Trimble SiteFID solution. So I'm going to go ahead and hide our poll questions. We've got one more that will come to you before the end of our webinar today, so keep an eye out for that. And we'll just kind of move along here. So again, as I mentioned at the top of the webinar, I'm not going to get too into regulations. The folks that are on the line, you folks that are actually paying attention to this webinar right now, depending on what state you're in, you know the regulations. What you're looking for today is a solution to help you take care of covering those regulations. And that's really what we're going to get into. But just kind of a general broad overview of the entire U.S. and the EPA regulations in terms of monitoring of landfills. You have to, when you're doing your serpentines, about every 100 feet. Now remember, this is for the U.S. The regulations are different in California. I'll get to those in just a second. You have to identify methane, anything over 500 parts per million. And if you find a hot spot, you have to go out and remonitor that. I think in general, you have to go back out after 10 days. If you still have hot spots, you have to go back out and do that again in 30 days. So those are kind of the general broad U.S. regulations. Now, I'm trying to give you those regulations in 3 bullet points. Obviously, there's a lot more to it. We're just hitting the high points here. But when it comes to California, the regulations are much more strict. When it comes to California, those serpentine grids, now rather than being 100 feet apart, we're talking about 25 feet apart. In terms of methane levels, very much like the EPA, if you find a hot spot, you have 10 days and then 30 days to go back out and do that. But some of the biggest ones in terms of methane levels in California, if you hit anything over 200 parts per million, you have to identify that location. So whereas the rest of the United States we're at 500 parts per million, here in California it's actually 200 parts per million. And then in California, rather than doing just instantaneous readings where we're walking along with our device and just looking for hot spots, we actually have to do something called integrated averaging in California, which means as you're walking along doing your serpentine line in your 50,000 square foot grid, if your average in that grid is 25 parts per million, you have to go back over that as well. So averaging is really important in California. There's word that the EPA is actually looking into the California regulations, and there's a very good chance, if you're listening to me in Oregon, Montana, anywhere else in the United States, within the next couple of years, the California regulations are going to seep into the rest of the United States. So it's good to at least keep an eye on the California regulations, because a lot of times the regulations that take place in California generally have a chance to kind of seep into what the rest of the United States is doing. And it's not just for landfill gas emissions. We've seen that in lots of other environmental applications as well. So in terms of what have people been doing in the past when it comes to landfill gas emissions, I've put together what I think is a very, very simple photo here, a very simple slide. And I'm not going to get too into depth in it, but basically people used to have a map of the landfill. They'd have the elevations, the topography, and they would walk out there, and they might start in a particular spot and say, okay, I'm going to walk to that telephone pole, and when I get to the end, I'm going to turn around, and now I'm going to walk to that water well that I see over there, and that's kind of how they did their serpentine lines. So what I'm kind of trying to show you here is a very simple map. You have someone out there with some type of wheel that's doing the measuring from side to side, and they've got some type of product, whether it's an FID or a PID or whatever they're using out there, that all they're doing is looking for hot spots. And if they find a hot spot, what do? They flag it. Well, that was all fine and dandy in the past when maybe the technology wasn't around to make this a simpler and faster job. That is not acceptable anymore, especially in California where the regulations are so tough. So that's kind of the old way of doing it. And today, what I want to do is introduce you to the new way of doing things, and that's the SiteFID from Trimble Environmental Services. It's a strong statement, but it's one of the greatest technologies to hit this particular application in, say, the last 15 or 17 years. And when I show you the demo of the software, you're going to understand why. One of the unique things about the SiteFID solution is its low-pressure hydrogen cylinder. And you're going to see this pop up a couple of times during the presentation. Our low-pressure hydrogen cylinder lasts 80 hours when you're out in the field. You don't have to refill the hydrogen for 80 hours. That's almost 3 times what some of our competitors offer. That's easily a week's worth of work, sometimes up to 2 weeks worth of work. The other nice thing is it runs at a very low PSI, 80 PSI, which again is about half of the PSI that a lot of our competitors use. That means less flameouts and longer life. So again, we're going to hit on that a little bit later. I just kind of wanted to make sure I made a point of that right now. Obviously, if you're out in a landfill, it has to be intrinsically safe, and it definitely meets that. In terms of the solution, really 3 main parts to it. You've got the handheld, in this case, a Trimble Nomad, which you're holding in your hand. The reason that we've gone with the Nomad is because it has a very high IP rating. You can drop it in water. If it's pouring rain, that's fine, although you're not really supposed to be out doing gas emissions when it's raining. I'm just saying it's a very hardy device. So anything that runs Windows Mobile, you can run the software on. But again, when you buy our package, it does come with the Nomad. The middle portion is the FID. This is not a new technology. Flame ionization detectors have been around for a long time. So that's the other nice thing about this is we're taking the best of new technologies like integrated high-accuracy GPS and teaming it up with something that you're already very comfortable using in the field. And then the third component is the software, which we'll demo here in a little bit, the SiteFID software, which really is a game changer. I'm not going to get into flame ionization detector theory. I am not an expert. But in terms of how an FID works, you pull in a sample, you put a flame to it, you test it, you break down the molecules in parts per million, and then it determines within the FID, it determines the parts per million of the methane. In terms of our system, again, I'm not going to read all the bullet points, but in terms of our system, you get the Nomad with integrated GPS, and I didn't even mention this yet. It's Bluetooth. So the communication between the FID and the GPS is Bluetooth. So there are no physical wires between the 2 units. So your hands are free to do whatever they want as you're holding the Nomad. We talked a little bit already about the cylinder, 70 hours of continuous operating time. And again, we'll give you a moment or two here to hit some of these other high points. The other really cool thing about this is if you have the Nomad and you're within an area where you've got Wi-Fi or you've got a hotspot on you, once you've finished with that day's work, you can email that file back to your office. It's very easy to use the Outlook that comes on the Nomad or any other program. You've got internet access on this, so you can send a Gmail, Hotmail, whatever your email account is. So you don't necessarily have to go back to the office, even if your office is clamoring for that data when you're finished at the end of the day. When it comes to the mapping, I'm going to show you a demonstration of that, but it's really, really cool because you can take aerials, you can take CAD files, and you can actually integrate them right into the handheld and look at those background files as you're in the field collecting your data. So you can have an aerial of the grid or an aerial of the entire landfill, and then you can also have your traverse in there as well if that's a CAD file. So the person, the field tech that's actually out there doing the work, all they have to do is follow a small red X that they see in the middle of the Nomad, and if you've got your traverses in there, they can literally follow that thing right down to the nub. And that's a nice feature too because in the past, you had people out there with the older technologies, and you didn't always know if they did what they said they did that day, if they covered the entire landfill, if they said, hey, look, we got half of it done today, we'll do the other half tomorrow. This leaves a breadcrumb trail when they're walking. So you're going to know that they did all the grids they said they did, and you're going to be able to track that. That's a very, very powerful tool, especially if you're a consultant and you've got to show this to your end user. The other nice thing is we talked about making these maps. We provide you with a free map production utility, which allows you to take your GIS information, a photo file like a JPEG or even a CAD file, convert that into the coordinate system that you use, and then pull that into your Nomad on your handheld so that your field crews can use it in the coordinate system that you use. So universally, we're looking at WGS84, but if you're using a state plane or you're using a different coordinate system and datum, we can set you up with that. It's a very simple process, and we'll actually train you on how to use that map utility if you're having some difficulties with it. So let's go ahead, take a test drive of the SiteFID software. I'm going to have to, just for a moment here, I'm going to have to kind of jump out of my PowerPoint presentation, and I'm going to jump into a couple of things here. I'm going to open up something that we call the SiteFID simulator. This is really cool because what it does is it actually gives me the ability to kind of fake the SiteFID software out into thinking that I've actually got the FID turned on when in reality I don't. This is a little tool that we use when we're, say, in your office to show you how the software works. But we do field demos as well. I've done plenty of those in my day. So here's the SiteFID software, and I've kind of got a shell here of a Nomad too. The first thing you have to do before you get into this software is put your name in. So you always know who the user is that day. So I'm going to go ahead and I'll put my name in. And the other cool thing about this, as you'll see, is once the menu comes up, it's just a matter of following the very large, easily explained buttons. So we start with SiteFID setup. We go to calibrate, background, inspect. Here's where we can go in and change individual settings. So let's start with the SiteFID setup. The first thing you're going to do is you need to establish a connection, a Bluetooth connection between your handheld and your SiteFID. And the cool thing about that is if you've ever used, say, a Trimble unit before and tried to hook that up with a laser rangefinder, you've got to go into Bluetooth settings, you've got to do an outgoing COM port, you've got to do an incoming COM port, you've got to do all this stuff to get that Bluetooth set up. With the SiteFID software, it's specifically only looking for the nearest SiteFID or flame ionization detector. So when you hit this button that says SiteFID Bluetooth search, that's all it's going to look for, and that's all you have to do. The setup is automatic. That saves you a lot of time as well. So I've already done that with what I've done prior to the webinar, so I don't necessarily need to do that. The next thing that we need to do is we need to calibrate our SiteFID. So the first thing, now remember, keep in mind for regulatory reasons, the first thing it's asking me is, hey, the cylinder that you're using to calibrate your methane, what's that cylinder number? So I can go in there, and I guess just for this particular, I'll just put 1, 2, 3. But obviously, you know, those things are 12, 13, 14 numerals and letters long. So there, I've got that in there. There's my calibration gas. I'm using 500 ppm. And then again, it's very simple. I just click Next. So from here, there's two different calibrations. I have to do a calibration precision. So I have to tell the SiteFID and the software this is 0 parts per million, and this is 500 parts per million. And again, for regulatory reasons, we have to be able to do that 3 times within a certain percentage. Now again, remember, I'm kind of tricking my software into thinking that I'm set up with a flame ionization detector, but I'm really not. So what you see over here, this little scale with my parts per million, that's the part where I'm going to be kind of tricking my SiteFID into thinking that I've actually got a calibration gas set up. So I'm just going to walk through this very quickly. Remember, we have to do it 3 times. First thing it says, oh my gosh, no SiteFID connected. So we established Bluetooth, but we forgot to do the actual connection. And the software is smart enough to know that. So all I have to do is hit Connect SiteFID. And I don't know if you guys heard that, but it actually kind of sounded like a doorbell. So you have very loud audio cues when certain events take place. Now it's telling me, hey, we have to ignite the flame before we do this. So I'll ignite the flame. And this makes it very easy for your field crews too, because if they skip a step, if they forget something, the software is smart enough to say, hey, you forgot to do something. So now the flame is on, I'm ready to go, I can do my calibrations. So it's looking for a 0 calibration first. This little scale over here, as you see as I kind of raise and lower that, see how my ppms are going up. So the first thing we're looking for is a 0, and I'm just going to set it at 0 and hit save. The next thing it's looking for, oops, let me cancel that out. Hang on, let me try that again. So let's go ahead, and I'll put that on 0, hit save. Okay, now it's asking me to attach calibration gas. So this is where I'm going to kind of trick it. I'll head up to 492 ought to work. We have to be within 5% plus or minus here. That's why you've seen this turn green. It was at red, now it's green. So remember, in order to make sure we hit the regulatory requirements, we have to do this 3 times. And again, I'm really kind of whizzing through this. When you're out in the field doing this with your calibration gas, sometimes it can take a little bit longer. And the last thing I'll do is I'll head up towards 500 again real quick here. Make sure that we're where we need to be. And then once we're finished, it will show us that we were plus or minus 5% each of those 3 times. Now remember, if one of these was not within that 5%, you'd have to do it over. So now we're going to go back to our calibration menu. Now we have to do response time, and that is how quickly can we get from 0 ppm to 500 ppm. And remember, we have to do that 3 times again. And so I'm going to go through this very quickly. The first thing we have to do is hit start. Our target is 471, so I'm just going to take my simulator here, hit save. So we did that within 4 seconds. I'm going to do that again for my second measurement. Hit start time. Zip that baby up as quickly as I can. Hit save. And then we have to do it one more time. I'll hit start timing. Get it back up to around 500 and hit save. So now we've calibrated the device. Please keep in mind, I went through that very, very quickly. So now we go back to our calibrations. It's all, we've got this complete. We've passed them all. I can hit save. Now that data file is saved as a CSV file. And as we do our reporting, once that day is finished, we can pull up that file and make sure that our field techs did that correctly. The next thing we need to do once we get to the site and we've got all this done is we've got to do our background data, wind conditions, things like that. So for this particular site, here's a site called Forward. Again, you can have multiple sites on here. And then within these sites, you can have multiple grids. So I'll just start with Forward. I'll hit OK. It's going to ask me the conditions. So first we need to do the weather conditions. For temperature, I'll put 70. For wind speed, I'll put 1. Wind direction, I'll go ahead and I'll put that wind is coming from the east. Skies clear, precipitation none. And then remember, we have to go to our site now and go upwind of our site. And for here, I'm just going to go ahead and I'll put 0 ppm reading upwind. And you have to hold that for 60 seconds. I have my software tricked to only do it for 10 seconds so that we don't have to sit around staring at each other for 60 seconds. Again, remember we have built-in GPS, so you're also going to get a Latin along. You can also put in a description of the location. I'm just going to go ahead and hit save. We'll go downwind. Do the same thing here. So if I was catching any methane, upwind or downwind, it would take that into consideration as I'm out in the field collecting my data. All right. I'm going to save that. So now we've got our background information saved, and that file has been saved. So now it's time to inspect. However, before I go to, well, let's go ahead and I'll do the inspect first just to keep things in order. So now we're out at our site. Our site name, I think this one we had called Forward. It's telling us the period that we're in. Our event, this is our initial. If this was our 10-day or our 30-day, we could go back in and change that. And then our grids. So you can have hundreds of grids. So what you can do is you can set up, and not all grids go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You can go from grid 5 to grid 20 to grid 30. But each time you go to a new grid, you pull up in the software and tell it which grid you're in so that it can follow you, and that's where the mapping really helps as well. So I'm going to go ahead and open an event. It says initial scan exists. I'm just going to just go ahead and I'm going to do a new initial scan. It's telling me my data will be lost. I'm fine with that. Okay, so now we're out in the field. And I've got my SiteFID, and I've got my map, and I've got my traverses. Now, unfortunately, because I have my GPS on in my office, it's not going to be able to show me the map I set up because it's pinpointing the GPS. But if I was at the site and I hit Map View, what you would see here is your background map, your traverse, topography, and any other layers that you had added onto that map. So the map overlays, you can see aerials with grids, aerials only. You're always going to want to keep measurements and GPS track on. That GPS track is that breadcrumb trail that I was telling you about. So as long as the device is on, it's tracking the person that's using it. So if I was actually at a site and I had the maps, and I'm going to show you what the maps look like, but again, because I've got GPS on at my office and I'm not actually at this site called Forward, it's not able to find that. So I'm going to go back to Data View, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start monitoring. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my device and put it next to my headphone. Now watch what happens as I start hitting some alarms. So now remember, one of the alarms is, because we're doing integrated, it's going to tell me once I get over 25 parts per million. So see how that turned red? So that's telling me that I may have to go back and I may have to re-walk this because I'm over that 25 parts per million. But the other thing I want you to keep an eye on is current PPM. Watch what happens, or listen to what happens when I get to my first alarm number of 200 parts per million. I hope you can hear that. That's a very light alarm saying, hey, you hit one of your thresholds of 200 parts per million. Now I keep walking. All of a sudden I'm up to 400 parts per million, which is my second threshold. Now the alarm gets a little bit more intense. And so when I'm out in the field, I can actually have headphones on so I can hear this, but it's also very loud out in the field. My last threshold is 500 parts per million, and all heck breaks loose when I hit 500 parts per million. So when I hit 500 parts per million, that device is telling me I've hit a very, very high threshold. So remember, the other thing that's going on is I'm capturing all this data in my integrated number. But let's say I hit 500 parts per million, and I want to stop doing my integrated averaging, and I want to do an instantaneous because I need to hit that hotspot, and I need to map it. All I need to do is hit pause monitor, and then log reading, and take my wand and go over that hotspot, and then when that data is downloaded onto a CSV file, it'll show up as the hotspot. So you don't need to put the pin up there. When you bring that data in and look at it, it's going to show it to you. And it's also GPS. So if you have to go back for a 10-day or a second 10-day or a 30-day, you can create a waypoint, and that person can head straight to that spot. And because this is high accuracy GPS, they're going to be able to find it very quickly. So the last thing I want to show you in the software, there we go, our inspection is saved. I want to go into the settings, and I don't want to get too into the weeds with the settings, but I do want to show you that you have some options in the settings. So if we're setting up individual grids, I'm under Configure Sites, and so if I've got traverses or maps or aerials that I want to put in, it's very easy to add a site, or within a site, add grids. because the grids are the most important thing when you're out there, and you want to make sure you're covering all your grids and you're staying within a couple of feet of your traverses. So within the settings, there are some things that you can set as well. Remember those warning levels that I kept hitting? There they are in here. And sample rates, again, the background rate, this should be set to 60, but I have it set to 10 just so that we didn't have to sit around for a minute waiting for that. And then up here, where the little plane is with the GPS, oh, look at that. I've acquired a WAF satellite. So now my accuracy is probably within a couple of feet. But here's my lat and long. Here's how many satellites it's using. Here's how many satellites it can see. So that is a very, very, very brief overview of the SiteFID software. When we do on-site demos, obviously, it's a little bit more intense than that. We can walk the site. And the nice thing about doing the demos is if you provide us with aerials or CAD files, we can convert those and we can actually use those on site, and that's very, very powerful. So the last thing I really want to show you before we hit our last poll question is, I was talking about those maps and how they look, and obviously because where I was, we couldn't see them. Well, here's a sample of some of those maps that you can create. This is an aerial with traverses on it. And obviously you can drill down on this, and you can drill down into individual grids to see where your traverses are. And then I was talking about that red GPS line. This photo on the right kind of shows you your GPS and what that looks like. It's a very bright red crosshair as you're walking. So again, if you have a grid system set up, and let's say you're in grid number 6, and you've drilled down on this, the person walking that grid will actually be able to stay right on that traverse because they're going to be able to see it as they're walking it. And that's pretty cool, because I've gone out on a couple of sites with people that don't have stuff like this, and it is literally, I start on this corner, and then I try to follow that tree trunk, or I try to follow that barn that's across, whatever they can do to stay on that grid. That's what they have to do. So with this particular device and with this particular solution, you don't have to be looking at something down the road to try to stay on a straight line or on your grid path. You're just looking at your handheld, and it's keeping you on the grid. So that's a pretty powerful tool. So I'm going to open it up for questions here in just a second. But before I do that, I'm going to share one last poll question with you. And again, for folks that are listening to this pre-recorded, you can go ahead and skip past this part. But my last question to you is this. Of those features that we just showed you, which one did you think, in your opinion, was the most powerful? Fantastic. I'm going to go ahead and close things up here. Thank you, everybody, for voting. I'll show you the results here real quick. Kind of neck and neck, the ability to import the maps and CAD files and the reporting. So I want to show you one more thing before I open it up for questions. I want to go and kind of show you, I'm going to actually get out of the SiteFID software, and I'm going to go back to the desktop, because a lot of people are probably wondering where those files are and how can I get them. You have to basically you can either email the files, or when you get back to your office you can plug into your computer. But in terms of where those files are, I'm going to go to File Explorer, and then under Export, SiteFID Monitor Export, here are the files that we create. Here's where the files are that we create as we're monitoring. Here's where the files are that we create as we're doing our calibrations. And then as we do our upwind, downwind, here are these files. So all you have to do is pull these files out, they're CSVs, export them into Excel, and you've got very powerful reporting that meets all regulatory standards. So that's, to me, that's a very, very, very powerful tool. Whereas in the past, you might have somebody out there walking with a pad of paper and a pencil and a map, falling all over themselves, maybe skipping certain areas because they don't know where to go or they're running out of time. those types of things are absolutely eliminated when it comes to the SiteFID. Final slide, in terms of the benefits of this system, truly integrated, anybody can use it. I can get people trained up on this thing in about 30 minutes. Obviously, it's going to improve your reporting because all of the work is done for you. It meets all the regulatory standards, whether it's nationally with the EPA or some of the stuff within California like AB 32 and some of the other standards. It's all been set up to work with all those different standards, all those different requirements. In terms of contact information, if you're watching, viewing, listening to this from Northern California, I'm the exclusive rep in Northern California. If you're in Idaho, it's Chase Fly out of our Idaho office. In the Mountain States, it's Jackson Bigley. If you're listening outside those territories, it'd be best for you to probably call your Trimble dealer and kind of figure out who the person is for your area, because they do have, I guess the term, I don't like to use the word protected territories, but these are exclusive distributors in these specific areas. So for you folks that are listening pre-recorded, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording right now. We appreciate your time, and if you have any additional questions, please give us a call.